item on our agenda is balanced economy benchmark presentation by Leslie Richardson.
Good afternoon. If you'll bear with me for a second, I'm just going to... Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Leslie Richardson. I'm the Economic Development Officer for the Cod Commission. I'm here today to present to you a series of benchmarks that we've been developing over the past year. This is part of our Stats Cape Cod project, where we're trying to improve the analysis that we do with basic data that is available from the census, from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Those are the three major federal agencies that provide economic data. That data is readily available on the web now in all sorts of different places, so we're trying to add value to that. And one of the ways that we wanted to do that was to look at benchmarks. Benchmarks are to give us some sense of where our economy is going over time and relative to other entities, like in this case the United States and the state of Massachusetts. So we developed, designed some benchmarks around our principles of economic development that are included in the regional policy plan. There are 4 principles, and we have focused on the first 2, which is a balanced economy, meaning that there's diversity within the economy, within the population base, the workforce, so that we're not totally dependent on any single industry. As we know, we are, a heavily tourism-based economy. So this is going to look over time to see how that evolves. The other area that we looked at is regional income growth, which is basically looking at the size of the pie. How big is the pie, is it growing, and how well is it distributed within. So those are the 2 principles of economic development that we focused on to begin with. The other 2 are efficiency and building on our existing assets. So the benchmarks for those aren't quite as straightforward. So, to start. The first and most important thing is, are we creating jobs in our economy? So this is an index benchmark that looks over time at the United States, Massachusetts, and Barnstable County, and looks at what is the job creation relative to where we were in 1990. Where are we in 2009? We peaked right about here in 2004, where we were 33% higher than our initial starting point in 1990. Not surprisingly, we've dipped down, but we are still doing well relative to ourselves, and we're growing at a higher rate than the state in the U.S. Seasonality is a big deal on the Cape. And one of the ways we wanted to look over time to see how seasonal this economy was is to compare our unemployment rates in January and our unemployment rates in July and look at what the ratio is and the difference. So you can see that as the difference increases, you see more seasonality in the economy, and as it decreases, you see less seasonality. So this green bar is the United States, which is not very seasonal, obviously. Massachusetts, however, is as seasonal, it appears, as Cape Cod. So that was an interesting finding. Industry diversity. The Governor's Regional Competitiveness Council, under a couple of governors ago, did cluster analyses of our income, of our economy. And they separated it into 3 different groupings: core, emerging, and other. So the core industries are the ones that we think of with tourism and healthcare. Emerging are those areas that we'd like to see some more growth in over time. And as you can see, we've got the majority of our employment is within our core industries, 66%. Relative to 22% in our emerging sector, which compares to Massachusetts at 34%, and the United States at 29%. So we know that this is an area that we can continue to work on and to grow. Let's see what other industries that we have activity in, but they're not necessarily areas where we foresee growth for our own economy. I think we've got some construction going on outside. Okay. So this is employment. It's also important to look at wages, see what our wages are doing. So we looked again at our core sectors of the economy, and this bar down the center is the U.S., so we're looking at how our wages differ from the United States. And as you can see, Barnstable County, we pay a little bit higher. Let's see if we can get that. A little bit higher on average than the United States. Massachusetts pays significantly higher. And as you can see, in our other industries, and in all industries, we're lower. So we are growing jobs, but our wages are still lower than when you compare them to the United States, and certainly when you compare them to Massachusetts. Now, looking at one specific sector, we look at the arts and leisure sector. The largest portion of the arts and leisure sector, interestingly, is 713, which is amusements, gambling, and recreation industries. A lot of that is actually golf courses. So those are employing a lot of people. So that's good to know. 712 is our museums, historical sites, and similar institutions, and that's the one that we've seen the most growth in, actually. I think I can. How do I do this one? There's a way to take things off, but I can't remember what it is. So. But Barnstable County at 712 has seen the most growth in jobs over time, which is great, actually, and compared to the United States. Let's see. I can't get it to work, but basically that shows our growth over time, and Barnstable County has seen significant growth in most areas. So. Business diversity. This looks at businesses by size. One of the things that we all know about the Cape's economy is that the majority of our businesses are small. But 61% of them actually employ between 1 and 4 people. When you add the next largest, under 20, you add another 2,596 businesses. So if you look over time, however, you see that small businesses have grown fairly steadily. They've grown, but they've grown fairly steadily. The biggest growth is in your 100+ businesses. So you've seen it's still only 1% of our mix, but they're the fastest growing. Now those are in any industry. Unfortunately, this data set I can't look at what industry those businesses are in, but some of them are probably some of the large retail establishments that are coming from the area, and some of them may be consolidations, like for instance, healthcare, things like that. Okay. Income diversity. The Cape's income is made up of, this looks actually at where our income is relative to 1990. So this is the 1990 census, this is the 2000 census, and it's looking at income groupings. So we had a much larger, under $30,000 income grouping in the 1990s than we do today. The higher income groupings have increased significantly over what they were in 1990. Now, some of this probably has to do with inflation, but not all of it. And you can see down below, when you compare it to household income, again, relative to 1990, you can see the groupings for Barnstable County and Massachusetts. Again, you see a trend upwards. So there are more people in the higher income areas, or in the higher income groups. And demographic diversity is not going to surprise anybody. We have fewer people in the younger age groupings, but one of the things that I think is important to note is that it's not as if it's all, I mean, we have a higher grouping in 65 plus, but we also have a higher preponderance of people in the 35 to 64 range, which is still a working age range. And so one of the things that we did was to look at our working age relative population relative to the U.S. And it is lower, but it's not significantly lower. So that's something that we need to keep in mind when we think about growth in our economy, is that our workforce is smaller. Okay. So the next is to look at the pie. And regional income growth, this is gross regional product. Looking at our metropolitan statistical area, Barnstable town, city, relative to other metropolitan statistical areas within Massachusetts. And it's looking, basically this is how much income is being generated by our area. So this is us right here. And we have increased significantly and then sort of leveled out. The biggest increases, interestingly, is in the Pittsfield's MSA. So they've obviously, they had a decline and they've seen some increase in their gross state product, or gross regional product, I guess it could be. But in terms of actual size, you can see the Boston, Cambridge, Quincy area is still enormous relative to the rest of the state. Real wages, this is overall total wages. How has that increased over time? Again, it's sort of a statistic that gets to the size of the pie. And we can see that we had a small dip in the early recession of the 1990s, but then we've seen steady growth since that time, and that's Barnstable County relative to Massachusetts. So we're growing a little bit faster and in the same general pattern. Interestingly, there is a separation right in here, but we seem to be coming together again, where we're doing better than the state as a whole. Now this is average wages, so this is what an individual might take home on average. And this is when you look at it just straight over time from 1990 to 2009. And this is when you adjust for inflation. So that tells you something about what's going on. It looks like the wages are increasing, but in reality, we're pretty much staying steady state. And again, as we saw earlier, wages are actually lower relative to other parts of the country and the state. Yes?
So for the average, you took the number of people making 200,000 and added them to the number of people making 50 cents. That's your average?
It's an average.
So that doesn't really tell you what
And this data set takes into account people who are working full-time, people who are working part-time. This is, I mean, what you're bringing up is one of the realities of statistics and measures and benchmarks is that they're tricky.
Depending on, you put your information in.
You have to think about it. What is the data that went in? And none of these data sets were designed to tell a region like Cape Cod how they were doing. So we've really tried to work with this data as much as possible to come up with the graphs and tables that tell the story as clearly as possible, but it's still difficult, and you do get.
So does that give you an accurate, I don't know if I'm looking for mean or median or average, because if you have a few people making 300,000 and everybody else makes 50 cents, you're still skewing your results.
In an ideal world, you would have all three.
It should be weighted by numbers of people making 50 cents as opposed to I don't know, which one am I looking for, the median, the mean, or the average?
Well, all three of them will tell you three
Well,
different
three,
things.
yeah.
Right.
The median, I think, would probably get to the issue that you're talking about. But what Leslie's previewing here is really a result of the grant that we've had with the County Economic Development Council that has allowed us to take this information, format it this way, get some new data sets. So this is still evolving. This is part of the Stats Cape Cod website, so all this is available interactively online. But the next step, Elizabeth, I think, gets to what you're talking about, which is we could break out and do sort of median, mean calculations just for the county.
Yeah.
The value of having this data set is that you can compare it to any other region. So it's an apples-to-apples comparison to put the Cape economy in the context of the state economy and the national economy. But I think clearly we could pick a few areas where we wanted to add more value to these data sets in a more specific way, and then we might be able to pick out a couple of comparative regions to do that. So it wouldn't be as extensively comparative as the data sets here are, but it starts to add value. And so that's how we see the Stats Cape Cod website emerging, to come up with these bench sites that look nationally and statewide, but then probably zero in on a few that are specific to the Cape.
Will we ever be able to come up with something out of all this where something is developed to help the people who are just getting paid average wage? Because the preponderance of the people out there, I think, are part-time or even full-time, and they're probably hourly, and they're probably getting hourly wage. I mean, average, whatever the federal minimum wage is, and a really critical thing to help our economy is somehow improve that, and I don't know if we ever will while we remain tourist-based.
Well, it's a good point. A lot of this information speaks to the seasonality of the economy currently. And part of our job at the Commission is to sort of think long-term about the economy on the Cape. So if it is a goal to transition from a seasonal economy to a more year-round economy, what are the conditions and the assumptions that you're going to make when you start to develop policies that are going to head in that direction? And I think those are exactly the kind of questions that Stats Cape Cod is putting out information so that we can pose those questions. How we answer them is really up to us, whether we're going to incorporate that into the regional policy plan or whether we're going to promote the publications of certain economic trends in a document on a regular basis that speaks to those kind of issues.
Excuse me. In the Cape Cod Times, either today or yesterday, the business section said the median income was $60,000 something. I found that a little hard to understand, but I was sort of going to ask you what you thought about that statement, if you saw it.
I know the data set that they're talking about, and I can't, that could be family income, I believe.
I think it's a family of four.
Is that? Okay.
And
I can understand.
So it's dual income, family of four, median 65,000.
which means that 50% of the families are above that, 50% are below that.
It was a nice little
So there's a lot
headline
of
that crossed our
50%
eye.
still there.
Peter?
Yeah. So this new website for the statistics is Stats Cape Cod?
Yes.
Is the name of it? And
Yeah, and I can show it to you after I'm finished.
well, that's fine. Who's building this?
We are.
Leslie built it.
Oh, congratulations. You're doing a great job. I'm serious
Thank
about
you.
that.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
But Leslie built it, and a lot of
With
what
the
you're
EDC.
seeing here, especially with the bells and whistles associated with making this data easier to interact with, has come from the EDC grant and some of the internal capacity that the Commission has built over the last 2 years with that grant. So we have people in-house who can do this.
I'll finish
Sure.
it.
Joyce?
I remember Paul Rosincius gave a workshop years ago in Eastham on the economy and how it was affecting households. And the startling figure was that it's taking, when you're talking about households by income and you're looking at under 10,000 or over 75,000, it's taking 4 and 5 people to pool their incomes to get to that level. So it looks like we're doing better, but we're not. It's taking more people to achieve that. And I have a question. Do these statistics take into consideration the cost of living on the Cape? I think maybe back to the same newspaper article that Roy was referring to. they are earning more money, but because the cost of living is so high, they're taking home less money, so we're doing worse.
Well,
And it's, you know, and this is unique to Cape Cod as you compare it to Massachusetts and the United States.
to that point, there's new census information out, and there will be more new census information that rolls out. And as it relates to the region, the headline is the Cape is now older and poor. And so those are the kind of issues that we're going to hone in on. But you have to factor those statements based on the national averages and the state averages again. And what you'll find is you know, incomes probably haven't dropped as much, but it's still housing costs on the Cape that are driving the standard of living and making it difficult for those people in the median income range to be successful.
And it'll, these statistics, if somebody's smart and wants to start a business, by using these statistics, they can build a business to accommodate what would be successful.
Yes. Now that's part of the concept behind Stats Cape Cod, is that those businesses, people that are looking to start businesses here, or those businesses that are looking to locate here, can look to this collection of facts, which at times is counter to the assumptions that people make about the Cape economy. So I think that that's an important thing going forward. I mean, it is a tool, and that's part of why it's there.
When you're talking about household income, are you also factoring in the fact that if you have 4 people in the house, whether 2 are contributing or 4, probably they're working 2 or 3 jobs each?
There's some other statistics that help to get at that.
Which makes
You
a
know?
huge difference when you really
Yes.
figure out what the real income is
Yeah,
and how far it goes or doesn't go.
And the real strength of these data sets will be using them in conjunction with some of the information that we have that's original data that we collected here. The second homeowner survey that we did several years back was quite successful, has a lot of information here. And we just received another grant from the EDC to do a business survey. And so that RFP is going out soon. And then we'll be able to ask some of that business-specific information to Cape businesses. And when we put all of this together in a database, we're going to be able to develop our own internal algorithms, which is, you know, just to answer the kind of questions that we want answered. And so that's what's exciting about the technical aspect of putting all this information in one spot.
And I guess that, you know, one of the things about data and benchmarks is that it should stimulate these kind of questions that you have. It's not necessarily going to answer them, though, but hopefully it will stimulate that kind of issue.
Is there a way of separating out the people who are retired and they are living on maybe annuities or generated income from investments, and those who are actually working, and what is the percentage of those people, and how much is that average income for the retired person as opposed to the households that are working?
They don't separate the average income that way, but they do separate out income into its different sources. So there's earned income, which is the blue line, and that's by where you live. So that's the earnings of people on Cape Cod, whether they've earned it here or in Boston or somewhere else. Plus dividends, interest, and rent. So that's anything that people make off of a stock portfolio, 401k. And then transfer payments, which is Social Security and welfare. And interestingly, I expected to see more of a downward trend in earnings and more of an upward trend in dividends, interest, and rent, just given the the retiree population. But we really don't see that, so that was interesting.
Yes.
This is really interesting too, if you get the figures for the number of older people that cannot afford to retire. So your working population is actually getting older. And then that then affects younger people trying to find jobs.
Yes.
This is fascinating. I think economics is very interesting anyways. And when you give all the charts and the figures and stuff, and you start putting all of it together, it just gives you a really good picture of us and why we're so special, but how we are in comparison to the state of Massachusetts, and this certainly should be beneficial to the state. in their workings.
Yes.
One last question, if I may, and then I'll shut up. Where does unemployment fit in here?
Well, we actually didn't do straight unemployment. We did look at it in this, on this graph in terms of seasonality. And basically what this is graphing is that in this, you know, in the 90s, there was a greater difference. There was much lower unemployment in the summer, much higher unemployment in the winter. Looks like it's equalizing more, so that it's not quite as seasonal now. But we didn't look at straight unemployment because basically what it does is this, depending on the month that you're in.
So, how accurate is this? I mean, does it reflect the people who have run out? Because
Well,
they
you
seem
never
to drop through the
capture the
cracks.
people that have left, just be, you know, thrown up their
Because, well,
hands.
no, they used up their benefits.
Yeah,
There's
but I don't
nothing out
have,
there.
I don't have unemployment.
So they don't
benefit.
show up anywhere? They've fallen through the cracks as usual?
There is some statistics on that, but this is unemployment rates, so it is different.
Do we deal with year-round population, visit the seasonal population, which is enormous in some towns? And that trend, especially now in income, where you have this huge slot for 4 months of tremendous income, multiple jobs, and a lot of people, and then all of a sudden September, October comes and you have this dramatic decline. I know our town, certainly, I'm not speaking for other towns, but we have a dramatic difference. And also you have a lot of people coming in with a lot of money in short chain, in short terms. And how, you know, that just throws off the whole dynamics when you talk about Massachusetts as a whole or a region as a whole. I could see some, the South Shore in Jersey or something like that, which is probably, or Cape May, New Jersey or something like that. Now, unlike some of the towns in Florida, which have more year-round populations, that when you talk about the Northeast Coast and some of the towns here that are affected, even up in the North Shore area.
Yeah, well, I think that's why you see that graph, this seasonality graph, why you see such a big difference between us and the United States. Because in the United States, they don't have that seasonal difference. It's more equal, it's equalized out. But one of the things about the tourism industry is it's an export industry in a sense. We're exporting our place. People are coming in, they're bringing their money, they're spending their money here, and then they're leaving. Instead of selling a good off Cape and bringing the money in, we're bringing them in, and they're leaving some of their income here. So it's, you know, it's a challenging industry, but it's also one that's very beneficial to the region because of that.
Excuse me. One of the things that I was wondering how you might factor in the personal care industry and also hospitality industry. There are some people that work, individuals that work 2 and 3 shifts a week.
Yeah,
And then,
it's really hard to get.
you know, at first I thought it was, you know, unusual, but I've seen quite a bit of it because of work that I do, and you know, you have to be careful you don't have to hire somebody that's tired, you know, and that sort of thing.
It would be, you know, something, a benchmark that might get to that would be looking at the trends in jobs versus the trends in the workforce population. So if your workforce population isn't increasing at the same rate as your jobs are increasing, then people are maybe having to work multiple jobs. So, I mean, you can go on with this stuff forever.
It's like the layer of an onion.
It
You're
is.
starting out with this and you just keep peeling it.
Yeah, a lot of the questions pertain to sort of the particulars of the Cape economy. And we can ask those questions, and we can collect some of that data originally, but that's going to be really of almost anecdotal significance. I mean, the significance of these databases is that they're comparative, but it's not going to answer every question. So I think we need to use this and then think strategically about the specific information that we want to ask locally to develop a long-term method to collect that on a consistent basis so that we can add value to the national trends, the statewide trends that we have. So I think that's sort of the next step of this project.
Yeah, and that's what our survey program is really designed, hopefully, to get some longitudinal data over time. It's going to take a while, but, and that's specific to Cape Cod.
Leslie, if I could,
Yes.
well, Paul mentioned cost of living and housing, but You have to add in the groceries, utilities, everything's more expensive on a car, not just housing. And
Yeah.
the question I had was, you mentioned that inflation would have an effect on some of the figures now. As we go from 1990 to 2009, are we still talking about $1990 or present dollars?
Yeah, and I tried to, in this graph, I tried to do that adjustment so that you could really see the difference. This is when you don't adjust for inflation. It looks like, oh, we're doing great, you know.
Right.
But there, where you adjust for inflation, you realize that we're staying the same. At least it didn't go down. That was something that I was pleased to see. And this is, these are for our, you know, they use the consumer price index for the Boston metro area, so it tries to get a little bit more region specific. But there was a great study done in the early part of this decade that looked at all of the different expenses that people incurred on Cape Cod. But that's really a difficult, challenging metric to get to, and that hasn't been replicated since then.
There was a graph that you showed where I think the growth in comparison to the state was trending, and then there was a point there where it actually looked like it did a little better. At a point there was more of a disparity between the state, and then it sort of evened out. What was that year? What period of time was that about?
2004.
Yeah, that was sort of in the mid, 2004 was sort of a peak for us, which is interesting, whereas it was a dip both in the US and in the state. So that was interesting. Elizabeth.
I just had a question. With all of the workers from off Cape and out of the country that come in every summer, is that because they get paid lower wages, or they will work for lower wages, or we don't have the people here to hire, or a combination of everything? Because if there's any way to incentivize better wages, then local people would benefit from the tourist economy as opposed to people who don't live here year-round.
Some of the discussions that I've been a part of relative to that issue, there are a range of reasons.
Yeah.
You know, some is that the college calendars changed, so you lost a whole workforce there.
But why aren't we hiring residents who are year-round?
But I think there was a significant discussion Cape-wide in the early 90s, and when we had a labor shortage.
Yeah.
And especially the seasonal businesses could not fill those positions. And the discussion was a very basic economic discussion. You either have to pay people who live here more to do those jobs, or you have to go on the H-1B visa program and import your labor. And the decision was made to go the H-1B road back then. And
Which
that
doesn't
hasn't changed.
support our labor, supports our economy, but not our laborers.
But that's a good point, Elizabeth, I think. And I think one of the parts of that point is, you know, in terms of our own labor force and who's here, it depends on the level of, you know, the training, the whole economic thing, how they've grown up, and that sort of thing. And sometimes the people that, you know, are out there looking for jobs, they get hired, but they're not really capable of working because they don't have working skills. And sometimes the temptation to use people from other states or other countries, you know, you get a different thing. But I think in terms of that group, you know, that we have that's local, I mean, it's such a complicated problem, but it's really something that needs to be addressed.
Way back in the 90s when they started, I'm thinking of the Stop and Shop in particular, they needed to hire more people. But they were bringing people in from Falmouth, they were bringing them in from New Bedford, and they started paying them an hourly wage as soon as they stepped on the bus. And it seemed if you factored in all of the money they were spending in order to transport the people here and then pay them for their 8-hour shift and then pay them to go home to Falmouth or New Bedford or where, I guess it was New Bedford, they could have used that income to hire local people. Our minimum wage increases on the Cape is very, very poor. And you can't earn a living to pay for your rent and your food and your gas with a job at McDonald's. And the people that are coming in and taking the jobs, some of them are being provided free housing. They work multiple shifts. The conditions aren't as great, but it's complicated.
It's very complicated. And what this last graph shows actually is that we did, on a net level. So when you take into account the number of people coming onto the Cape to work, and you take into account the number of people going off the Cape, overall, we've got a lot more people going off Cape than we are importing labor.
Yeah, so we're exporting a lot more of our labor force now than we used to import our labor force.
But that would take it to year-round jobs that are more off Cape than on Cape, and that's really the direction.
It actually bodes well for growing some of those emerging sectors that I talked about early on.
Yeah, see, this graph tells us exactly to that point that we're exporting full-time labor off for the kind of jobs that we don't have on the Cape. So if we can bring those jobs to the Cape, then we don't have to export our labor force anymore. And so that's how we can use this data to make some of those policy decisions.
One of the challenges that we have is because we developed such, and there's nothing wrong with the seasonal tourism economy, we have imported our labor for a large percentage of that. And as you're saying, the ones that have full-time labor are off Cape. So how do we, your information is trying to make a swing backwards, but then that puts a tremendous amount of strain on the infrastructure of getting businesses here for housing and all of that, because people do not want to live in a lot of the conditions that a lot of the seasonal workers have to, in order to survive, do. And that's really what some of that is. I mean, there's some elephants in the room about all of the seasonal labor that is part of that discussion.
One of the benefits that we have as a project benefit for a DRI is to provide seasonal housing for their workers. That would be considered a benefit if we were looking at a resort, for example. One of our waiver criteria is specifically designed to encourage the development of emerging industries, or at least give them credit if they are part of emerging industries. So some of the policies that we've developed do try and at least take into account some of the things that we see in the statistics. But some of the things that we've talked about here tonight are very difficult for the Commission to actually do anything about from a regulatory standpoint. But from a planning standpoint, that's what we're working on in terms of infrastructure development, trying to encourage development of economic centers where you can have density and reduce the cost of infrastructure, improve your information infrastructure so you can have people, professionals working all across the Cape, out of their homes. All of our IBM people work out of their homes. One in Falmouth, one in Sandwich.
Keep asking questions. Since the key, obviously, to most of the jobs and income is education, has there been any thought to improving what's available for training after high school? I know there's 4 Cs, but do we have anything like, all the ones you see on TV that teach you how to pitch motorcycles or BMWs or computer work? Do we have any possibility of turning the 2 Cape Tech schools also into continuing education, so you could, they have college level certificates or something? Do they have that for once you graduate, you could continue?
The 2 tech schools on the Cape are both really successful tech schools. We look sort of statewide, even nationally, and we can promote that in conjunction with workforce development activities at the community college to support workforce development. One of the major SEDS projects is to look at the possibility of a 4-year institution on the Cape, different kinds of training, and maybe not a bricks and mortars kind of school, but sort of that virtual learning environment that is becoming a bigger part of the higher education experience. So with both of those projects we're looking at, the point of the presentation today is to show you the data sets that we have, how they're presenting them, and all these questions are good questions. And so we need to sort of figure out a way that we can have this discussion on a regular basis, marvel it into inform the process that staff's going to take at adding value with more local information. But you can see that it's really good information, and as it intersects, it can really be informative. So that, the good thing about economics is it's not judgment-based. The numbers are what the numbers are, and they tell you what they tell you. So we're not trying to make judgments about the Cape economy in any way. We're just trying to let you know what it is so that you can be informed as the Cape Cod Commission to act in a planning capacity to support that economy in however you see fit.
Mr. Chair.
A brief mention about the tech schools. I'm a former school committee member at Cape Tech down in Howard. And a lot of the kids, when they graduate, are certified in that particular category, whether it's a trade or some of them professionals. We had a very successful, I guess you'd call it maritime technology. Kids working on motors, outboards, and so forth and so on. Most of those kids were very much in demand by the industry as soon as they graduated.
Yes.
When's your next data set? When do you get another drop for 10?
Well, it depends on which measure you're looking at, but...
Any of them. I mean, this is a complete data set for 09, right?
Right.
And it was complete.
Yeah, so usually it's a year lag. You don't get 2010 until mid-2011.
Okay, so yeah, that was the question. And have you presented this to the Chamber of Commerce yet?
No,
we haven't presented to the Chamber. We have presented to the EDC. We had a great conversation around this. We're also planning right now we're looking at an April-May timeframe to do the SEDS update. So what we want to do is reach out to the Chamber to see if they might be considering their economic summit at the same time. I'd love it if the Commission, the EDC, the Chamber could partner up on maybe a 2-day economic summit, and we would present a lot of this publicly to promote the same kind of discussion. So maybe we're going to wrap it up. You want to show them the stats, Cape Cod?
Sure, well, I just get one.
We can look at all day long.
This is really interesting.
It's available online, so you can go home and play with it. And if you have any more questions, you can just sort of send
If I
them in.
can't sleep.
Send them in by email, please.
This is Stats Cape Cod.
So this is, we've got all sorts of information. I mean, there's information about different data sets. So if you want to know what employment data sets there are, we've got a whole little system here that'll tell you all the different data sets and what time period they cover, blah, blah, blah. Then we've got some value-added things. We've got the Cape Trends publication that we did for the towns. And then the sort of highlight is this map in the middle, which is a live map. You can click on any county in Massachusetts, any county in the United States, actually. So we'll pick us. You can do a side-by-side where you can compare us to another place. So Massachusetts, Barnstable County. And that gives you data on population, housing, income, work, BLS and BLA data. And all of this is live so that you know every single time you click on that you're getting the absolute newest data that's out there. So you don't have to go, constantly try and maintain your own data sets. You can just go to this site and find out what the latest population data is for Barnstable County and how it compares to Massachusetts or the United States or Plymouth County or whatever. So,
Wow. Kudos to you. This is amazing.
Fantastic.
Just to think that you can sit down and organize all of this, the information.
it's very difficult.
No, this is really super. And it's going to be good for so many people outside the Cape Cod Commission.
We're just trying to get it to a point where we can publicize this a little bit more. This is better than, Cape Cod Commission has always been a repository for a lot of this information, but the partnership with the EDC has allowed us to order new data sets, work with companies like Esri to get the most up-to-date data in a real-time way. And it's not you know, it used to be collected in piles of paper when I first got here, literally, in sort of an 18th century information technology. And so now we've updated it, we've come full circle, and so it's very sort of user-friendly now. And Leslie has done all the work on this, so really.
Bravo.
Yes, very good.
Definitely an example of partnerships, because we worked with other organizations, including an organization out in Indiana, to get all this done.
So this is great if you have any questions there, but I have one more thing, if you have another 5 minutes, just to show you with the intersection of this information. Come right across. We have all this economic development information now. We have this current partnership with IBM. So we're looking at IBM at collecting all of the water quality information that we have on the Cape, whether it's marine, freshwater, groundwater, and then creating a land use database that will basically do a Cape-wide build-out. And then when you start to intersect those two databases together, you get some very powerful information. And the hope is that if we can demonstrate the value of that information set, that it will allow us to attack problems like wastewater in a way that will be more persuasive with EPA and DEP about less capital-intensive ways to solve that problem, which has the potential of lowering that cost significantly. So that's why I think there's so much at stake in this IBM relationship, and that's going well. This is a copy of the watershed tour. And this gives you Cape-wide information, so what I want to show you is a different way. You get all the bar graphs and the numbers of looking at the economic data. Another way to look at it, though, is map-based, and this is where the GIS function really comes in. So this is that map of the Cape that we start in every watershed presentation with. The gold shows you the town boundaries. The rest of it is the watersheds overlaid on it, 46 of them nitrogen sensitive. The blue watersheds are those watersheds that cross town boundaries, and the gray ones are those that are contained wholly within one single town. So you can see 2/3 of these watersheds cross town lines. So how are you going to meet TMDLs unless the towns are working together? But when we look at the nature of the problem and septic systems, and 80% coming from wastewater, on-site disposal, and then we get into these McConnell land use maps. This is what the Cape used to look like in 1971, with the green being open space, yellow being residential. That's how it looked in 1995. That's how it looked in 1999. So you can see that residential development, there's on-site wastewater disposals, that highlights the problem. And this is our sole source aquifer, and we get into a lot of this other stuff that I'm not going to go into with you right now. These are our density maps. These are value-added maps right here. These are maps that we did in-house, looking at different ways to measure density based on parcel dots or length of road between households. That's this map. And this all factors into capital facilities. If you are going to have capital intensive, where does it make sense to do different kinds of technologies? This is our regional wastewater management plan. These are our options, and these are the costs. You know, if you sue the entire Cape, $8 billion. Estimates to get where we need to be to meet TMDL is about $3 billion. If we allow build-out to go forward, it doubles that cost. But these are the demographic slides. So again, the watersheds on the town. But this shows you population density. So now if you can imagine all the economic data that you just looked at and how that's going to intersect with this census group block data that we have on population. The darker areas are more populated. Then housing units per square mile. So you can see where the housing units per square mile, where that density is. And most of our wastewater problems on the south side. You can see the density on the south side. Population change between 1980 and 1990. The darker areas are more dense. That's the base right there, and so that jumps out only because it's one big parcel. So we have to factor that into our analysis. Between 1990 and 2000, between 2000 and 2009, blue areas actually show a decrease in population. So if we look at the aggregate between 1980 and 2009, you can see where the density has happened. But if we go back to the population maps, you can see that the population starts on the coast. And the Cape, you can start to see a differentiation between the Old Kings Highway and Route 28. And those coastal properties that filled in first, and then the middle that fills in after. And so this is our Cape-wide share of seasonal homes. So to Austin's point, there you go. You want to talk about the seasonal economy? There it is. And so when we start to look at seasonal homes, then owner-occupied units, so you see the mirror image. So the average household size, your bigger sizes are in the middle. Your median housing values, again, predictably. Those seasonal homes are extraordinarily expensive coastal properties. In the middle, not so much. Median household income. So now we're looking at the median income. And you see where that denser areas, you've got more income. Labor force population, darker areas, more labor force. So you can see where that year-round labor force is. And then on top of that, we're going to look at unemployment. So you see the unemployment rates. So labor force, unemployment. And so then we look at residential, commercial, industrial parcels. And potential developable open space, those red areas are those spaces that aren't developed now, that aren't protected in any way. That's where we go, we start to double the cost of wastewater cleanup, if we allow that kind of development there. And then we're back here. But what emerges when you look at the GIS part of this is a tale of two different Cape Cods. There's the Cape Cod in the middle, and there's the Cape Cod north of the Kings Highway and south of Route 28 and on the Outer Cape. And so when you look at the ability to pay for wastewater solutions, which unlike transportation infrastructure comes almost exclusively from the local towns and from property tax owners, and you start to intersect some of that economic data that we looked at earlier, you have to ask the question, if you're going to put betterments that are $60,000 to $100,000 on that population density, that labor force, that year-round population in the middle there, what's going to be the result?
Foreclosure.
Foreclosures, for sales, and so what happens to the Cape economy when 25% of that housing stock goes on the market at the same time? In distressed sales. And the potential is an economic dislocation that could last for generations. So that's how important that economic data is, that's how important the GIS program is in approaching these big problems, which then again comes back to IBM and collecting information, synthesizing it, using it, analyzing it, in a way to lower those costs, to make that affordable. So, you know, it's the intersection of all that we do. And I think over the last 3 years, it's breaking down the silos even in here internally so that information flows together and is useful to tell a comprehensive story about what the Cape is, what the real threats are, and how we're going to solve problems going forward.
Well, is that available on the website?
Yes.
I mean, can people go to the watershed?
Yes, you should join our Facebook page. Become a fan.
Yes, I know, and I was supposed to and pass it on.
We only have like
and I
5
encourage
right now.
people to do that, and I haven't done it myself. But so people can get on this and go from page to
all of
page
this.
and play with all of this.
Yeah, and in the watershed tours, we get, it's the same kind of information, but it's specific to the particular watershed.
Right.
This is sort of the Cape-wide.
So that's the one that's available, is the Cape-wide one, to see the overall picture?
They're all available. Every
Oh.
watershed that we've been to is available specifically, and the Cape-wide model is also available online to look at. And then you've got Stats Cape Cod and the economic data. So I'm very excited about how over the next year or two, we're going to tie all of these information data sets together to present a clear and concise picture of who we are as a region. Sure.
If you're talking about the assessments for treatment and not being able to afford it and then selling your house, you won't sell your house because the next person who comes in will be forced to pay their assessment.
But that's exactly the point, though. If a significant percentage of the housing stock goes up for sale at the same time, whether it's by foreclosure or by someone trying to sell their home, and they can't sell it, what happens to property values?
Right.
Right. And so this tail between the haves and at least the have less becomes more drastic, and that gap becomes incredible. And what you're seeing is a figurative and maybe a literal hollowing out of Cape Cod. And so we can't allow that to happen. There's got to be a sensible way to approach this. But the first thing that we've got to get over, in my opinion, is sort of the parochial nature of problem solving as it relates to wastewater and other issues on the Cape. A town-by-town approach is not going to be successful, and we can't afford it. So we have to work together, and I think that's your role as the Cape Cod Commission is to facilitate those kind of discussions. But there's an urgency out there that people need to be aware of.
How, I had a discussion with somebody from Orleans today on sparrow. How do you encourage the towns that are already going?
I'm not encouraging it.
Little notice, we need a minute break for a tape change.
Okay, I'm done. Are you done? Yeah, I think I'm done unless there are any questions. We can take that offline.
Well,